Well, so yeah, another week has passed here in Rainbow Unicorn Land, and with every week that passes, you sure as hell know that you're going to receive yet another episode from the Justice Committee to talk about the hate crime bill and why it is an essential and necessary thing that needs to be implemented. But the proverbial activists like Danny Boyle from Bemis, and of course, somebody I'm all too familiar with, or at first glance she appeared familiar. And when you've been doing this for as long as I have, this occasionally happens. I was listening to this with her rather terrible audio, has to be said, and I thought to myself, I know this girl from somewhere, and sure enough, I've actually covered her before in a video. A rather comical video, may I add.
Busy building another man's dream to be the greatest. They deprive to steal our land, and our discoveries pass without a brand. Credit we demand. And if we don't concede, you leave us to the side and take sides with the west side. You step in, bargain within our borders, expanding your territory and begin to cause a division. A false power to dominate a
I don't even know that.
nation. Every step you take ends in a probation. If you're not white, you're automatically an accusation.
Oh, here we go.
If you're not white, it's an abomination.
You know, and the reason that I bring this video up, I mean, when I first came across this was just ridiculous. But it's not the first time that I've covered where she comes from. Intercultural Youth Scotland. Now, of course, the proverbial anti-racist experts, or in her case, as the title calls her in this latest episode from the Justice Committee here, an ambassador for anti-racism, or words to that effect. And I remember a long time ago, how many months ago now? December last year. You know, they came out with some report that was touted at the time, and obviously this article doesn't showcase what I'm talking about in terms of the headline, but I remember it was groundbreaking. You know, new research had been done to showcase just how prevalent racism was in Scottish schools. But anybody that actually read the study, which I did, wasn't very long, it's not that difficult, you know. For example, it says here, I feel that class topics are mainly about European culture and not other cultures. I mean, how dare they not talk about Amy Dunbar's culture? Oh, no. How dare a Scottish school promote European culture, supposedly, in their history lessons, or in their topics, you know? It's a white country, built by whites, and they have the audacity to teach European-centric topics. Oh, well, that's racism. That's those fucking microaggressions kicking in again. See, the problem with these people really gets on my nerves is we are dictated to on a constant basis about how we're all one, and in the next breath, these people are allowed to sort of prioritise and collectivise for their own group. They're never happy. If we're all one, you shouldn't have a problem with European culture being the dominant talking point in a school. You don't see yourself, and that is the problem. Your in-group preference kicks in. That's something that we have, I think anyway, been taught to ignore. But I would hardly call this groundbreaking research that they were talking about. If I can skip through it briefly to show you other examples. The majority of teachers in my school aren't racist, but you can acknowledge that some of them are, even when I am one of the top students in class. I will be treated differently compared to white, noisy pupils that lack effort. It was also obvious how I was treated differently because of my colour and religion by my teacher. To be honest, it wasn't only me, but directed to all colour pupils. I mean, this is anecdotal at best. No proof. The way that you view the world, the way that you see things, and the way that you think things are may not necessarily be the case, but until there's proof either way, you can't say that. It's not fucking groundbreaking, is it? Far from it. But this is the sort of level we're at now, where the Scottish government, on the taxpayers' dime, by the way, is dredging up, scraping the barrel type of thing, little twats that make poems about racism, and people that can't conjure up a proper conclusive study. Instead, they have to predicate it on, or base it, on mere anecdotal evidence. So anyway, that brings me to this, of course, and her audio, as I said, was pretty terrible, but you just need to hear this crap. I'm so sick of this shit. I mean, we're talking about a hate crime bill which will completely curtail people's speech, whether or not the likes of Hamza Yusuf, who came out rather recently, in fact, I think it was yesterday. Again, I might make a video after this on that, of him trying to justify his cancerous little bill. But it seems to just veer off topic completely. Every single thing that I've listened to from these twats. And I mean, it's a long process. I have to admit, I haven't watched the whole thing. I couldn't get through 3 hours and 59 minutes of this shit. You know, I'm prepared to give some of my time to it, but there's only so much of my soul I'm prepared to let die in a day. So, it just, the way it veers off topic all the time. We're talking about our hate crime bill, and then it's about systems and about structures, the systemic, institutionalized racism. I mean, I don't even think this wee bam in the middle knows what that fucking means. These people, this anti-racist ideology is deconstructionist at best. That's what they're about. They want to deconstruct our society. They want to deconstruct who we are, because their key goal, their key aspiration is to topple whiteness, because whiteness is the problem. And again, through this, the woman in the red in the bottom left corner, she talked about the need for protections for the BAMEs, because the BAMEs suffer from my racism. But this is not equality. I pointed out so many times in the videos that I've made on this and other videos relating to anti-racism, etc. It's white people who will not be protected. It's a bill created to protect everyone by straight white men. That's not equality. It's equal now. They claim it's not because of their ideology. Because things don't appear equal on paper. Microaggressions rife in the air along with the non-existent coronavirus. Fuck me, man. Anyway.
Hi, I don't know if you'll be able to hear my audio okay, because
Here's a poem. Here's a poem.
you might have just switched my video off, if you can't hear
it's fine.
So just let me know if I had some
It's
problems.
fine.
It's fine,
Yeah.
fabulous. Fabulous. Yeah, so thank you very much once again for having me. It's really nice to be here and to see some of...
See, it says here, I mean, you can't see it. She's an anti-racist and pro-black ambassador, an educator. She's an educator. Oh, from Intercultural Youth Scotland. Oh.
people I've worked with, Danny from
And as I said, like, the audio is pretty terrible, so, you know, bear with me.
So it's really nice to be here. So addressing the questions that you posed to us. So first of all, I'd say that race definitely needs to be dealt with separately, echoing what
Because you're not white, that's why you want it to be a separate issue.
other people have said. Primarily, I would say it's due to the historical and institutional nature of racism. And
You're going to lose count how many times she brings up institutional here. I really would love her to define it, but we're talking about her hate crime bill, but now all of a sudden it's veered off. And I'll give her credit, she's not the only one that does this. I mean, that guy from Bemis did it as well, right? But they're trying to justify a hate crime bill, and their reasoning for it is because of our race in this particular matter, to be protected separately because of historical contexts, you know, like we're constantly reminded this is modern Scotland, but yeah, they love to dredge up history when they want.
often what we see is when race is kind of in amongst other like equality groups and equality spaces and bills, race tends to be the protective characteristic that's often left behind, that's ignored. And there's lots of protective characteristics and groups that we can see that have made a lot of progress throughout the years in Scotland, but with race and race relations, it just seems to be something that we really can't make a lot of steps with, and that is because it is really something that's really difficult to tackle, and it's so institutional. And
It's institutional. I mean, just the words. I just think that they're just buzzwords. It's so institutional. That's why it's difficult to tackle. No, let me break this down for you. You're supposed to be an ambassador and an educator. Well, let me educate you. If you're talking about progress, if we're talking about gay rights, etc., gay rights wasn't really predicated on a total fallacy of an ideology. Gay rights was about, I suppose, achieving gay marriage and equal status, not to be discriminated against because you're homosexual, etc., right? And then, of course, we had women's rights. Now, women have equal rights now, but some feminists will tell you otherwise, right? Then, of course, we have the gender bender ideology. Now, I wouldn't exactly say that they have equal rights, but I suppose if you're that way inclined, you could say that they have made progress. The problem with the likes of yourself and anybody else that follows this anti-racist ideology is that their ideology and reality are two separate issues, or two separate entities even. Because race, everyone is protected equally under the law. It is illegal to discriminate, for example, in the workplace. You can't hire somebody because they're a certain colour or not hire someone because of a certain colour, but the likes of these people will say things to the effect of, Tyrone didn't get the job, therefore it's racism. You know, I was discriminated against in the interview process. How? Well, I didn't get the job. Things like that. Or we're talking about microaggressions. The problem with these people is everything is racist. They're an anti-racist, they're anti-racist activists. And they wish to quell and stamp out and eradicate racism. The problem with this, however, is they have redefined the word racism. Everything is racism. No longer is it about seeing another group of people as subordinate to your own purely on the basis of how they appear, skin-wise, etc. No, it's now about institutions and structures and barriers. We're talking about equity. We're not talking about equality anymore because they fucking got it. You cannot solve a problem that doesn't exist. So that's why there's not been any progress in terms of race relations even, because they are talking about problems that don't exist. This is literally a figment of these people's imaginations, but the problem with that is that would be fine in and of itself. More power to them to sit and yammer on all day long, all night long. But the problem is that not only do they run their mouth, they have government backing. They get to sit on panels and justify their BS. Their cancerous ideology is now starting to creep into the academia of Scottish schools. It's going too far. They've got equality. All this really realistically boils down to is them working in their own group interests because they're anti-white, anti-Scottish, anti-European, anti-Western. Their ideology is predicated on it, for fuck's sake. But they manage to camouflage what they're really about, working in their own self-interest at the detriment of everybody else. They camouflage it by saying they're fighting for equality because they're the eternal victims. That's the problem here.
Also, the problems with the current structuring of how race is dealt with, if it was a part of the consolidated bill, is that some of the main issues is that unless an intersectional or unless the framework of intersectionality was adopted, which is a framework that allows multiple identities to be considered in one instance. So in terms of if, for example, it was a black transgender man, then in that instance that would be understood as kind of two levels of discrimination, like under like gender and race. But because that framework is still is very difficult for reporting bodies and for other people to kind of take into account, that's a very idealistic way to kind of deal with hate crime, and we just don't see that has the potential to be taken up correctly and understood about how to operate in that manner. So we really see that for race to be understood properly, it needs to be done separately, because currently as things stand...
Properly, when she says properly, like they all do, they're talking about it needs to be understood from the way I see it, not how it is, because they're not in reality. And that would be fine, as I said, on its own, but their bullshit is creeping into reality. You know? It's not being seen properly because it's not being done the way she wants it to be done. We need to deconstruct whiteness. We need to tell kids that diversity is a strength. We need to tell kids that race doesn't exist.
And the institutions just really don't have a good understanding.
Institutions again. We're talking about a hate crime bill. What has an institution or institutions got to do with the average Joe Blog on the streets who says something that you perceive as insultive or insulting?
Racism, and it's so institutional that there's so much unlearning to do, and it just really...
Unlearning. Do you hear that? There's so much unlearning to do. Deconstructionists. That's what they're about. They want to tear down your society and rebuild it.
It will not be tackled correctly if it's with the other protected characteristics. So on the other matters, so in terms of insulting in regards to race, I think I also agree with everyone else in terms of what is a big problem is that microaggressions and kind of don't level of understanding when it comes to kind of like non-covert racism it's really difficult. So in terms of understanding microaggressions and their impact, they're kind of daily instances of racism that kind of really add up to cause significant racial trauma. And A lot of them can come under the instances of insulting, and it's really hard to understand that, the impact of that, if they aren't included in this bill. So we do see the need to keep that in.
We need to keep insulting in the bill as well. Yeah, you know, we need to keep it in, because insulting should be a hate crime because it causes Allard-Dunbar microaggressions and racial trauma. A microaggression. This is how low we are scraping the bottle, Scotland. Huh? Microaggressions. That's another thing that comes from their conscious little ideology that I was going on about earlier, eh? I mean, that word, I never heard of it before until I started hearing about anti-racist experts. So-called anyway. You know? Microaggressions. Daily microaggressions. You say something that could be covert, subtle, unintentional, unconscious. You know? The list goes on. These people are a joke. They're a fucking joke. But they're on panels. They're on panels with people that are supposed to be Scottish politicians, spewing out their venomous bile and talking about it as if it's supposed to be taken seriously. And the worst thing about it is nobody there's disagreeing. They're all nodding their heads, and they're fucking white. What is wrong with these people? I mean, I don't know what to say at this point. We as a nation are doomed. We're doomed. This is a joke. There's no disagreement. There never is. I mean, it gets worse.
And also in terms of like the pyramid of white supremacy, I don't know if it's a concept that many people might have heard of.
But she's going to tell you all about it because she's the expert. Yeah.
How that operates is that the bottom level is kind of covert acts of racism, and then at the top would be all the way up to genocide. So like what happens at the bottom levels of discrimination and kind of insults and things like that is when they are continuously allowed, then the kind of the discrimination and the violence escalates to a point that you get vilified and accepted violence, and then all the way up to genocide, as I said. So we really see that there really
even that's manipulation. I mean, I can't remember off the cuff. Is it the 7 steps to genocide, or it might be the 10? Forgive me, I can't remember. It was a while ago that I was looking at it, but the point remains the same. It didn't say anything about white supremacy, but she's manipulated that now. It says, oh, it's the pyramid of white supremacy, you know. Like any group of people could quite easily be genocided. It's happened historically, not just by white people, of course. But we're talking about a hate crime bill here, and she's now talking about why insults and insultive behaviour needs to be criminalised because it could potentially lead to genocide. Define an insult, define hate, define offence. We're talking about microaggressions here. We're talking about things that hurt your feelings. This is a joke. It's a fucking joke that this has been discussed in the Scottish Parliament's YouTube channel. It's a joke. Every single element of speech should be protected, bar incitement to violence. An insult is not violence. An insult may hurt your feelings, but I don't give a fuck.
Can't be a point where you start it. It just has to be everything is included. And in terms of the point also on including of immigration status, we also see that race, although people understand it as, you know, a very kind of clear thing, it as a protected characteristic and as it would be understood if race was dealt with differently, we think it would adequately cover immigration status kind of in a more kind of broad general sense. So hopefully that covers everything. I'm sorry about my audio and the video and audio.
No, that's fine. We actually could hear you the second part of your answer a bit better. I think when you went just to audio. Can I just ask you, Amy? Do you think is there more that could be done in respect of race? Are we tackling it? Are we being robust enough, basically, with how we're doing it?
I mean, this is where we're at now. Questions like that are being asked. I mean, how much of a pedestal, or how big a pedestal are you going to put these people on, where you just constantly grovel, bootlick, pander, and come across as virtuous? I mean, is this all an act, and it's really just some sort of attempt to make yourself feel better? in some attempt to show the world that you're virtuous. Because bear in mind that the negative consequences that come as a result of this shit, where if and when this bill gets passed, everybody nodding in agreement that racism, white supremacy and all this shit exists, it becomes a burden, and it comes at a cost. It is a detriment to us as a people, because that's what they're talking about here. They're making out that we're the problem. We're making out that we're racists. We're making out that our system is filled to the brim of internalized institutional structures, etc. It's our society that's been torn apart. It's us that are being denigrated. And for what? For what? To achieve some solution, to achieve some, or to solve a problem, as I said, that doesn't exist. It's just...
I know we'll flesh this out in further questions from my colleagues, but if I could just maybe ask you, Amy, what you think of that?
I definitely think that race is an area that is not being dealt with robustly enough.
Of course you fucking do, though. That's my point, as I said earlier. That the reason that these people say that is because they're not in reality. The anti-racist ideology is not reality. So when she talks about dealing with race robustly enough, she's actually talking about scrapping the current methodology to supposedly rectify the wrongs of race inequality and replace it with her ideology. That's what these people are about.
Otherwise, there would have been significant improvements that were easy to...
But there has been. There's been improvements, but there's not been improvements in the lens, or the world through the lens of an anti-racist, quote-unquote, expert.
Measure, and we're easy to measure, and I think it's quite disheartening that so many other protected characteristics groups have made significant progress over the years, and it just seems to be that race just doesn't make any significant improvement. And I know it seems like a very small thing, but for example, there was a Christmas advert that went out yesterday, and it was showing a black family, and it literally received so many complaints and insults, and there was so many hatred and racism under the comments on it on social media. And it's the tiniest things, such as a Christmas advert that features a black family
on YouTube. Yeah, we're talking about YouTube. We're talking about trolls. Yeah, there probably was some people that were mean and nasty, but that's the internet. How does that represent or reflect reality, or real life even? See, in her piss-poor attempt to justify what she's talking about, she brings up an advert on the internet and looks at a comment section. Pretty much every YouTube video has one or two dickheads. Pretty much every single YouTube content creator could tell you that they've had a barrage of dickheads throughout their existence on said platforms. And even a video of a black family at Christmas is going to generate either trolls or people that you would consider racist. That does not reflect or represent society. Try again.
Receives so much backlash, and it's if something as tiny as that is such a problem for the Scottish population, then clearly we have not got to a point where race is something that is talked about enough or understood correctly. And I think
correctly. So if we were to replace the education system with the anti-racist education or ideology even, there would be none of that under the YouTube videos. We're not talking about race enough. It's funny because the only people that continuously talk about race are the likes of her. It's funny, isn't it? We're not talking about race enough. No, we're not talking about race in the way that they wish us to talk about race, because race doesn't exist. Whiteness is the problem. It's internalized, etc. I'm being for it all. What a joke.
The main problem is I know that people are afraid of getting it wrong, and I know it's a really difficult thing to talk about and to tackle if you aren't a person of colour, if you aren't black. But it really needs to be something that is done now, because the only people...
Yeah, you might get it wrong as a patronising shit, yeah. You might get it wrong because you're not doing it my way. If you're not a person of colour, you might find it difficult to talk about because you're white. Yeah, of course. Fucking sick of you pricks, eh?
The people that are suffering the most are black and POC young people particularly, and the communities in general, and it's really difficult to be able to advocate for yourself and do all of this work by yourself. We really need people in positions of power, like a lot of yourselves, to be able to elevate and provide equitable support. And
equitable, aye? Not equality.
Really start making lots of headway when it comes to race because it just isn't getting there.
Because of mean YouTube comments.
Okay, thanks, Amy. You made a very strong point there.
Did she?
I think Danny wants to come in. I'm not sure if Liam, did you want to come in? Liam McCarthy?
Ron, if you bring in the other two witnesses, I'll bring in the other members, okay?
All right, okay. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think Danny, did you want to come back?
Thanks very much, Rona, and I'll be as brief as I possibly can. Amy raises a number of really critical points there, and I think that's one of the big challenges, not just for this committee, but for Parliament and society more broadly, is to find where responses to the challenges which Amy has identified are most appropriately situated. So when Amy's raising issues around about microaggressions and that experience of being a young person of colour or nationality, ethnic or national origin.
See, if they didn't know microaggressions existed, it's funny, they get taught that microaggressions exist and then all of a sudden it becomes a problem that they're plagued with. Now, I didn't know what a microaggression was until I heard these people, not today, but in the past, people like them talking about it. Now, if you never told black and ethnic minorities of the Bains about microaggressions, they would never know they existed. You told them, you provided them with a problem for them to cling to. Microaggressions, they don't exist. This is fucking stupid. It gives them the opportunity or the excuse to say that white people are doing things that annoy them.
In Scotland, the reality is that those microaggressions are very unlikely to meet a criminal threshold, either as a standalone offence,
good,
or as certainly not as a stirring up of racial hatred offence. So it's there the question is set to us as a society and the committee and whatever deliberations you then progress forward, is how do we challenge the microaggressions while also using the
I think Danny might have frozen there.
Danny's just dropped off, so we're going to have to...
I can only really speak on behalf of race here, not the other characteristics. But essentially, insulting has been a part of the legislation for decades. And if there was an issue with this, I'm sure we would have found out about it by now. And in regards to the other characteristics, something I meant to add earlier is if other groups were wanting extensions and it was evidence that they were needed, then we would have no objection to them being extended, the protections.
Okay, thank you. Danny, the point I was, or the question I was asking in response to something you were saying earlier, and Amy had picked up about the risk of escalation, as you were, I think, talking about the microaggressions and where those can potentially be can lead to, if not addressed. But I suppose the question I was raising was about whether or not that sits in terms of where the criminal justice sector needs to engage, or whether it needs to engage other interventions that would hopefully reduce the risk that you're talking about, maybe through education or as Amy's saying, restorative justice options.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm happy to respond to that. Sorry, I don't know where I get cut off last time, so I'll be as brief as possible. I'm competing with my 18-month-old who's doing a tiny talk singing class at the moment, so apologies for that. So the microaggressions point is this, so we can't just completely ignore it. That's not what I was saying, so just to clarify that. But it's just for the purposes of this committee and the bill, it sits somewhere separately to what our intervention needs to be. And Amy's correctly, as you've nicely summarised there, picked upon some of the non-judicial interventions which are required to be taken forward. One I would highlight, and there's two parallel issues here which are under review by the International Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination at the moment, and pertain specifically and directly to Scotland, is a point around about education and a point around about racially aggravated hate crime data disaggregation, because we need to have these two things happening concurrently in order to actually have an understanding of where these non-judicial interventions need to be prioritised and taking place. The point on the curriculum, which the committee has identified, which to some degree is where the acceptability of individuals' behaviour when it comes to microaggressions derives from, is a perception which is based upon communities' experiences historically past and present, in other jurisdictions and here within Scotland and the UK, of British colonialism, imperialism, the slave trade, and other grave human rights violations. It's these building blocks which have enabled people over a sustained period of time to view people of colour or different nationality or ethnic or national origin as somehow being worthy of disdain based upon those specific characteristics. So the point within the Scottish education system, which is ongoing at the moment, is to unpick the legacy of colonialism within our domestic, devolved areas of governance, and be that in education, and understand what impact that global vision and the why different communities live and exist in Scotland, and the microaggressions which may flow from it, or other prejudice or inequalities which come from that hierarchy of understanding of different communities. What has to happen alongside that, however, is a full disaggregation of the nature of racist hate crime in Scotland. We need to know what black people, what white people, what Asian people, what other people are actually targeted by racially aggravated hate crime in Scotland in order to inform those non-judicial interventions. So there's quite a lot that has to happen around about this, and I'll leave it there just now.
As will I. What a shit show, huh? Peace.